don't know. Oh, sorry.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Katie Moore in the WWL Louisiana newsroom, and we're just getting word that a significant development has happened over at federal court this afternoon. Apparently, a federal judge has decided that the NOPD will be allowed to end their federal oversight early. Now, just in January, February timeframe of this year, Judge Susie Morgan, who oversees this document and this process called a consent decree, decided that the NOPD could sort of enter an off-ramp, a way out of this federal oversight that has been ongoing since around 2010. A consent decree is basically a court-ordered document that puts that federal oversight over an agency that has been found to have not policing that's not meeting the standards of people's civil rights in the United States. And there were concerns and questions about the NOPD's policing practices, among many other things, that led to the NOPD actually willingly getting into this agreement with the federal courts for this oversight. Under Mayor Mitch Landrieu at the time, the NOPD decided they needed some sort of oversight in order to bring their policing standards up to constitutional standards. That's how the courts end up getting involved in situations like this. And it's not just the NOPD that's under a consent decree like this. It happens with police departments all over the country. And what we have heard from the Trump administration since Donald Trump was elected was that he did not want the federal government to have this kind of oversight over so many police departments around the country. Felt like it was overly onerous on the police departments, it was unneeded, and that the police departments should be policing themselves on a more local level. So what that means is that the Department of Justice under the Trump administration has moved in several instances to get these police departments out from under federal oversight and federal control. And that is what we're seeing here in New Orleans at this hour. Just a little while ago, there was a hearing in the case in federal court. Judge Susie Morgan has been overseeing the consent decree involving New Orleans police since it was started back in 2011, 2012 timeframe. You know, she has been the one who has held hearing after hearing with both the NOPD, city attorneys, everyone who's been involved in this. And I think what we've heard from Mayor LaToya Cantrell is that the federal oversight involving the consent decree has been adding a lot of steps and difficulty to the jobs of New Orleans police officers that may be unnecessary. And not only that, there is a huge cost associated with the consent decree. So that's also been an argument here. In addition, some, including many rank and file on the police department, have felt like it hampered recruitment, it hampered retention of police officers. And as we know, the NOPD is now at a historic low in terms of the number of officers actually out on the street on a regular basis. So there has been a recruitment and retention crisis in the NOPD for several years now. many people blame that on the consent decree and on all of the excess steps that the New Orleans police officers and the police department has to take, all the hoops that they have to jump through in order to make sure that they're meeting all the terms of the document. Now, if you take a look at the Consent Decree Monitor's website, there's been a website that's been set up during that time so that the public could be actively engaged in the process all along, because the public really is who's affected by this, who's affected by how New Orleans police their own community. And so the Consent Decree Monitor set up a website. They, held hearing after hearing with people, talking about, what's been going on through the process and the steps that the NOPD had to take in order to get out from under this federal oversight. Now, just earlier this year, again, as I mentioned at the top of this, the NOPD requested to get out from under this consent decree, and Judge Susie Morgan put them under a retention period, or, kind of a, as I mentioned, an off-ramp to kind of get them in the direction to where they could move out from under the consent decree. That was supposed to last 2 years. That was in January. We're now sitting here in October, and we have Susie Morgan asking to get the NOPD out quickly, at a much quicker time frame. So NOPD is likely going to get out from under this consent decree shortly. There have been appeals at the Fifth Circuit, which is, another federal court, about trying to get the NOPD out from under this document, under this oversight. And so Judge Morgan essentially said today that if the appellate court requested or got rid of the current proceedings that were happening, that Judge Susie Morgan would allow them to get out from underneath it. So basically, it's a procedural step that has to happen. And she said if that procedural step happens with the appellate court, then she will agree to the joint motion between the NOPD and the federal court to get out from under, or the Justice Department rather, to get out from under this. Now let me just read this order to you. This is what she issued just a little while ago. You can see it right here. On September 4th, 2025, the parties filed a joint motion for indicative ruling on Rule 60B-5. It's the motion to dissolve the consent decree. In that motion, the parties request the court indicate how it would rule on a joint Rule 60B-5 motion for relief from the final judgment granting the motion for entry of consent decree filed by the United States of America and the City of New Orleans regarding the New Orleans Police Department as amended and restated. Basically, the consent decree. It's a lot of legal language, but what they're asking is, how would Susie Morgan rule if they filed a joint motion to get the NOPD out from under the consent decree? And what her order says today, and what her ruling rather says today, is if the parties file a joint Rule 60B-5 motion for relief from the consent decree, the court will grant the motion, provided the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals remands the pending appeal for that purpose, meaning the appeal that's going on at that court level, the city has appealed whether or not they need to be under the consent decree still. So if that appellate court decides to remand this back to the district court, which is where Susie Morgan is, then basically she's saying she will let the NOPD out from under the consent decree. This is obviously a historic moment for the city of New Orleans and for the New Orleans Police Department, given that they have been under this federal oversight and unable to make the changes that the court has felt were necessary to bring the NOPD up to a policing standard that they feel is appropriate until this point. So I know, just again from talking to rank and file police officers, from hearing from elected officials over the last 10 years or so, many have been complaining about the fact that they feel like this has been overly onerous on the police department and the city in terms of the cost, in terms of the hoops that they had to jump through. They felt like they had brought the police department up to a standard that they could now adequately police themselves and make sure that they were handling the public and handling policing in New Orleans in a constitutional manner, in a manner that meets the civil rights of the citizens that they are policing. This all came about because of the investigations that happened with the NOPD in the years after Hurricane Katrina, the Danziger Bridge shooting that left Ronald Madison dead, the Glover shooting that happened in Algiers. Donald Glover was killed, and there was an investigation into that shooting after Katrina, and many of those cases really fired up the public because many police officers were actually charged and convicted in those cases of unconstitutional policing. And so that's how we ended up here under this consent decree. Again, Mitch Landrieu saying at the time that he welcomed federal oversight in order to bring the NOPD up to the standards that many felt that the citizens of New Orleans deserved. So we're going to continue to follow this as the afternoon goes on, because it is a significant development in not only the policing of the citizens of New Orleans, maintaining those constitutional standards that they have established so far. Also, from a budget standpoint, we've obviously heard from the mayor very recently and from City Council member Joe Giarrusso that the city at this moment is facing a $100 million budget shortfall. In order to plug that gap, the mayor requested in her initial budget presentation to increase sales taxes, property taxes, fees in the city of New Orleans. So huge cost of life and cost of living increases, significant ones rather, for the citizens of New Orleans in order to plug that gap. This consent decree has added to the cost of the NOPD, added to the cost of policing in the city. So one would think that that would ease the burden of the police department as the budgeting process moves forward. So that's certainly top of mind, I'm sure, for all the city leaders who are looking at this major development that's coming out of federal court today, as they consider this ruling from Judge Susie Morgan, basically saying that she would grant a motion between the United States of America, which is the Justice Department, and the city of New Orleans and the NOPD to get the NOPD out from under the consent decree. So significant news coming out of federal court. I think some advocates are probably going to have some concerns about this. I think, if you take a look at the regular reports that have been done on the NOPD by the consent decree monitors, I think there are still some issues that some organizations in the city of New Orleans might feel need to be addressed by the NOPD, needed to be addressed before they got out from under this consent decree. So it's going to be a mixed bag. The reaction to this, I think, both from the city leaders' standpoint and the NOPD standpoint, and some neighborhood and community groups who feel like the NOPD still has some work to do. But what we have heard from Superintendent Ann Kirkpatrick over the years, since she has taken the helm of the NOPD, is that, she really felt like she was in a position to maintain that constitutional level of policing without having to jump through the hoops of the federal oversight. And so, I think that's one of the reasons that she got the job in the first place, was that Mayor Cantrell felt like she was the person to lead the NOPD out from under this. And that is exactly what we're seeing right now. Both took a change in leadership at the NOPD and a change in leadership in the White House in order for this to happen. And that is what we're seeing right now. So it's unclear when the appellate court might make a decision on remanding that appellate situation back down to Susie Morgan. At that time, that's when she would officially grant the motion to get the NOPD out from underneath the consent decree. So we're going to have to wait and see when that is going to unfold as the days and weeks, move forward here. But this is a significant development for the city of New Orleans, for the NOPD, and for the citizens of New Orleans. And it's something to watch as we move forward. So I'm going to leave everyone out there with that, but we will, of course, continue to follow this story as the afternoon goes on.